Great. Welcome, everyone. We are excited you're all joining us for today's Cura Chat with a very special guest speaker. First, a little bit about Cura. Cura is a career accelerator. We help first-gen and early career launch and build their careers faster. We host monthly Cura Chats and invite speakers to share their stories about their career journey. And we help the Cura community grow their knowledge, confidence, their network, and help them build critical career skills as they navigate the next steps for their career. So we are so excited to welcome Daniel Castro, the CEO and co-founder of Persona X. Fun fact, our March Cura Chat speaker, Jasmine Diaz, is the person that introduced us to Daniel. So small world and the power of networking in action. So Daniel has played pivotal roles in shaping the future of companies such as Walmart, LG, Sephora, Verizon. Wow, all huge brands, leveraging his unique ability to bridge the gap between engineering and design. At Exabeam, as Senior Director of Design, he led the vision for cutting-edge user experience that contributed to the company's impressive $2.4 billion valuation. And prior to that, he was Director of UX at Sumo Logic and built a globally recognized UX team that was instrumental in the company's successful multi-billion-dollar IPO. So when he's not building billion-dollar empires, he's really passionate about mentoring, and he agreed to be a Cura Chat guest speaker to be able to connect with all of you. And this was a quick yes for him. So really grateful to you, Daniel. Daniel also helps underrepresented youth through Street Code Academy. Some of you may have heard. They are in the Bay Area, and they really help to prepare the next generation of tech leaders. So Daniel has had an impressive career, but it's really what he shared about his early career that we thought, wow, our Cura community really needs to hear from him. So welcome, Daniel. We're excited for today's chat.
Thank you. Likewise.
So let's start with hearing a little bit more about your background. Where did you grow up? What were 1 to 2 key challenges or pivotal moments that really shaped who you are today?
Yeah, that's good. Well, we have to go way back. So I'm from a small, well, it's not that small now, but it was a small city called Merced in Central Valley, California. It's known for its farming. It's like gateway to Yosemite. I guess those are some of the things. And so I think starting with the fact that it was, back I was born in the 70s, I won't say my age, but, in the 80s, in that period of time, also 90s, which were not good times in terms of gangs and, some of the challenges that you have in socially, economically challenged neighborhoods. So that I would say that's probably the first start. The first challenge is just where you're born. You don't get to choose that. That's kind of how it is. And so, and then the other part is that as part of that, the culturally, Merced wasn't really known for like its education, wasn't like its forte. So it wasn't really a common conversation. It wasn't an everyday conversation. What are you going to do when you grow up? That kind of thing. It's more like you're going to work, and that's how it is. So I would say that's probably the biggest challenge that I had. The sort of the mindset that kind of just comes with that in that particular period of time. Now they have a university, they're Stanislaus, so it's awesome. So they've made a lot of progress on that from that front.
Yeah. That's a really
I
great.
was just gonna.
Yeah,
I was just gonna say, sorry. That created. I would say that triggered the curiosity on my side, just always wanting to know. So that kind of what did the opposite effect for me, and that's where my journey kind of starts.
Great. I love that. So tell us about what you were curious about. What were the things that were going through your mind at that time and when you thought about your future?
Yeah, everything. So the interesting thing, so I ended up leaving school a little early. And the irony of that was that, I was always a very hyper person. And I think the curiosity probably also drives that, so that hyperness. But when I left school, that's when I actually, something triggered in me that I wanted to learn everything. It was like it did the opposite effect. So before, I didn't read a lot. I didn't like reading. I've always been into art, so I always try to figure out a way to get teachers to, allow me to, instead of writing a book report, to do some kind of art project or something in exchange. And so I was always trying to, weave my way to figure out how I can manage school in the way that kind of worked best for me. But when I got out of school early, um, that kind of triggered me to start reading. And like, I guess I started feel like the fear of not knowing things. And so I
Mm.
started kind of learning how to self-teach myself a lot. And that basically, that curiosity for the world, I've always really loved culture. And art, I think, is one of those things that drives culture. So the music, different nationalities, different cultures. And so that led me to, like, where can I go, where this is, ingrained in the city. And I went to New York. So that's the beginning of me going from a small city into, at the time, thinking this is the biggest city I can imagine where I can go. And I left to New York City, lived in Brooklyn for about 5 years. And of course, that was, for me, it was beautiful because I got to see this, a melting pot, like all the different cultures and, just the hustle and bustle of it all. So I was just living life, just dancing salsa and bachata and merengue, almost every weekend with Dominicans, Colombians, Cubans, Puerto Ricans, and just all the different nationalities of Latin America, plus, all the others of the world, right? So it was an amazing time for me.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love what you shared about your curiosities. And I'm hearing all the things that are threaded to creativity, right? The arts, creativity, everything that kind of made you come
Mm-hmm.
alive. Going from Merced to New York, and I love what you said, the biggest city, that you knew about.
Yeah.
What was your expectation for going to New York? And so two part, what was your expectation? And two, was it hard for you to just get up and move? Or how did you plan for such a big transition? What were you thinking about?
Yeah. I had friends that were, I was fortunate I had friends that were in New York, so they kind of gave me the lowdown, which made me,
Mm,
they implanted the bug for me to go over there. The decision was easy, quite
mm,
frankly. Like, I've always been like that. I've always been, even to this day, just, if I want to do something, I'll figure out a way and I'll just do it and, commit to the decision. And I think that's an important part of it, committing to a decision, because the mindset is everything. When I got to New York, I just want to eat up the world. Like, everything was great to me. You can kind of start with a negative attitude or a positive attitude. And for me, it was just great. Like, seeing all the differences and seeing, just learning so much, because just the experience. Plus, there was no internet or cell phones at the time. Well, internet was kind of starting up. This was in '93, and so during that period of time, I was just really about consuming everything. So from that standpoint, it was just a hustle and bustle. I was working for a publishing company and just mailroom, working in, just different jobs, office supplies and things like that. And that's kind of what got me into tech, because I kind of accidentally crashed into, the computer department, and then that kind of just kicked me into a whole new, another world as well.
oh my gosh, I have so many questions about that. So I'm trying to imagine Daniel, artist, having a great time, enjoying all these things, lots of great experiences. I love what you said about commitment, but also choice, right? You
Hmm.
chose how to think about this and what experiences to have. And then so you were working in the mailroom. Tell us
Hmm.
about that. Like, at what point, if you're doing a lot of the artwork, right? Sounds like you were pretty immersed in that at the
Yeah.
time. What made you think, oh, what's this thing about tech? And how did you know you wanted to explore that a little bit?
So two events happened that around the same period of time, because I was around a lot of departments. One was they needed help they were setting up, they were installing SAP. That was my first instance of understanding of like software. They were installing SAP, and there was they wanted me to help out, and there was a computer guy who was setting up the systems, and he was doing scripting. He had MS DOS, and he was scripting, and that blew my mind. Like I had never, like I was like, what is happening here? Like this guy's writing these weird, characters for me, and it's just like, how does the system understand that? I've always been like real obsessive. If I want to know about something, I'm just going to go all in, you know. And so that was the first thing. And I asked him a million questions. He was just trying to explain to me, the poor guy, like how a computer interprets code, right? And then, I was fortunate that I started getting, becoming an assistant to a buyer. And so I was using, which was back then Visual Basic, and I was using the Microsoft tools. He told me to call the computer department. The computer department support told me to open up a little console in I think it was Access or Excel. I don't remember exactly, but he basically told me, type in exactly what I tell you to type. And I wrote basic, right? So I was coding without knowing. He was just telling me. Then when I committed it, it changed, and it like did something on the screen. And again, like that was like, but this time now I'm participating. So I was just like, okay, that's it. I have to find out what this is all about, right? So from then on, I just started eating up everything I could about coding. I didn't even know where to start. It didn't matter. Like I was visiting the computer department, I was asking them questions, and it really is just rapid fire of curiosity, because you don't even know what to ask. So you just kind of start going in that path. So that really set the bug of technology for me. And coming from such an offline world, from a small city, this to me was just like magic. So I just couldn't let it go. So, fast forward, I moved to Southern California. I have my daughter, it's a baby, she's newborn. I'm trying to make it work like everybody else, and I actually started selling wine and beer and liquor, and I'm a salesperson now, and so I'm hustling and bustling, but I couldn't forget about the technology. So I got a computer and I start teaching myself how to code. That was when Yahoo was out. And then, I'm going to fast forward because there's a lot here, but basically I'm already kind of trying to figure out a way to, how do I learn this stuff? And we moved to Puerto Rico because that's where my in-laws were at. And that's when I transitioned. So one of the key things that I've done throughout my career that now looking back, I see the connection, is every career transition, there's been a connection between what I'm doing now to the thing I want to do. So for example, I started selling computers, right? So that got me into the tech industry. I wasn't in the tech industry, but I was selling computers. That put me in the world where now I was surrounded by people that were, at least either they were programmers or something, but I'm selling computers. And then DSL was at the time, there was like dial up. So I would tell my in-laws and everybody, because you would have to tie up the phone lines. So I would say, hey, I'm going to tie up the phone lines at 10 o'clock at night. And I would study from 10 to 6 in the morning. And I would just study anything I could get. The internet, the rise of the internet was the information age. So it was like, for me, that I was so hungry. I actually started selling courses. And so I was taking my own courses. And so that got me just self-taught myself how to code, like basically what happened. So I taught what I did, and this is, this is the way I just kind of work backwards. So I knew I needed to get into tech. I didn't know how, I didn't know what I needed to learn. So what I did was, I also knew they were making a lot of money, so that wasn't driving. So I would look at the job postings, and I would look at what requirements they had, and I would see words that were repeated. So I would see like HTML, HTML, and I was like, what is this HTML? Or JavaScript, JavaScript, JavaScript. And so I just worked backwards. So what I would do is I would start, okay, HTML. I see that these things are being repeated. So I would just start studying it. And so I taught myself HTML, then I taught myself JavaScript, then I taught myself CSS, and then I started studying Java, and then I started, studying databases, SQL, and I just started really just, quite honestly, I would consume everything I could during the period of time that I would doing the internet. And whenever the internet was down, I had books. Like back in the day, you would go buy the books and read the books. So that's what I taught myself how to code, and that was my official entry into tech.
Okay. So I love what you said. I knew I wanted to get into tech and I didn't know how and I didn't know what. But yet you were looking at these job descriptions and looking for these keywords that kept coming up.
Yeah.
How did you start to think about, oh, this could lead into this space, or, oh, this other area in tech is really interesting. Maybe it could lead me to this. Did you know, or how were you narrowing down the kinds of things you could be doing with what you were learning?
No, I didn't know. I didn't even know what I didn't know. Like at the time, the funny thing is, and I think we spoke about this briefly last time, was that if I would have known what I know now, I probably would have been too scared. Because one thing that I didn't read was you need computer science. You need a bachelor's in computer science. You need a master's in computer science. Those were requirements. I didn't even pay attention to that. I just knew that I needed to learn something, right? So what I did was, what I did know was that you needed experience.
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, now here's my next rock to climb. And so what started happening was that I started creating my own company. So I was like, I'm just going to create an internet company, and I had a legitimate idea, and I built this idea of like a network because I saw Yahoo, and I was like, oh, this could be a network for businesses. And so I built it, I branded it, everything I was learning, I was applying it to this thing. And so I put that on my resume, and it was the rise of the dot-com era. So
Mm.
what led me to that was that I didn't know if I was ready. I had one friend who was in tech that I did a kind of a dry run, like look at my critique, whatever, and see if you think I can do it. But when I applied, it was the rise of the dot-com era, so there was such a huge need. They would call me, so I would apply at night. I would put all my resumes, and in the morning they would call me. They would do a phone interview, like, when, what's your availability? When could you start? And I would say, well, I need to move from where? I'm in Puerto Rico. They're like, oh no, we need you like tomorrow. Like you need, and that's when I started getting brave. And I was like, oh man, this is real. Like people were actually interested. And
Mm.
so, that's where my trajectory to, okay, can I actually make it? I didn't even, it was called Silicon Valley. I just like, can I go into tech? So that's when I said, to my wife, okay, I think I could do this. So I moved back. My parents lived in a little town, Livingston, and by Merced there. And I like, hey, give me 30 days. I'll get a job in 30 days. Like that was my next thing. So, we moved, and sure enough, like I already had calls lined up. So I started going to the interviews, but that's when things got real, because that's when I realized what Silicon Valley was as I was interviewing, like being in these environments and just kind of understanding a different culture. That was when I like kind of like the culture shock where you come in and you're like, okay, now I'm going to get a job here, but what's happening, right? And that was the next hurdle that I had there. So
Wow.
from there, again, it's just a matter of observation. I think if there's anything that street smarts helps you is being observative, and observe everything and kind of adapt. So while you don't have the book smarts, you have the street smarts, and you're able to have that hustle, right? So at that point, it was a matter of like a lot of failure, because I mean, come on, like I'm competing against computer science and Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, you name it, like all the schools and people from all over the world, super intelligent. And I remember times where they would literally put us head to head where we was like, okay, code this, and they were nice enough to tell me, no, you didn't make it because of this and that. But, I just kept going. And then from there, I got one person who said I reminded them of him. And so he was just like, okay, like it just like clicked. He became one of the best bosses I could have. So, he's the one that opened the doors. And basically, through a series of interviews that I failed, the last one, he's like, no, don't worry, just come in. You're going to meet the director of engineering. And, and I was fortunate that he's the one that gave me the first shot. He saw the hunger. I was cheap, but for me, I was making a lot of money at the time. I was like, oh my God, I'm rich. And I was making like, pennies on the dollar compared to what the engineers were making.
Right. Gosh, there's so much there. I love what you said about you were reverse engineering what you needed. And then, you didn't know what you didn't know. You said,
Mm-hmm.
oh, computer science, I need to have that background, right? If you knew that then, how that might deter you from continuing to be curious and learning these things, right?
Yeah,
Because I felt like you were breaking things down in a way where you just said, okay, I'm going to tackle this, I'm going to tackle that. And then
right,
now trying to move to Silicon Valley and explore those opportunities, you were kind of doing the same thing and not giving up.
right,
What advice would you have for someone? Because what's coming up for me is you didn't overthink it too much until
right.
something showed you and they said, oh, you need to have computer science. Oh, okay, well, I don't have that. Now what? So what advice do you
Yeah.
have for people trying to figure out what they want to do, maybe don't know what to do, but are kind of generally curious about an area
Mm-hmm.
or an industry?
Yeah, I think so. That mindset that I had actually ironically fit perfectly for Silicon Valley, because
Mm,
Silicon Valley is all about the MVP, good enough, right? Like
yeah.
ship, just like whatever's good enough, ship and iterate. And that's basically what I was doing. I was my own startup. Like it's just you're the product. So if you think
Mm,
about it from that perspective, and I'm very careful about how I speak about these things because it could be off-putting when people say, "Oh, your personal brand." I think it's more of like I've heard it. Someone mentioned it that I liked is like your your personal professional opinion, right?
mhm,
But at the end of the
mhm,
day, you're from a business perspective, you're the product, okay?
mm,
And so if you think about it from a Silicon Valley standpoint, or like from that standpoint, it's just good enough is good enough. Iterate and ship. So if you look at it from that perspective, you just do. Like it
mm.
would. There's no better time as now, because with AI, with YouTube, with everything that is at our disposal, there's really no excuse for anyone to not do what they want to do. Now, there's a lot of competition, and you need to differentiate yourself. But really, at the end of the day, you have your own story, very unique to everybody else. And that's the one thing that I realized, that as I moved in my trajectory in my career, the uniqueness that was me played a role in that, whether you could see it as a strength or as a weakness. And usually it's both, right? Your strength
Mm,
is your weakness. As long as you're conscious and you're aware of that, you use that as a differentiator. So I would say the most important thing is to do it. Do whatever
mm,
you want to do, because if it's not the right thing, it'll help you adapt to the right thing. But if you don't do it, you're not going to have a something to kind of bounce off of, right? I think people are too afraid of failure.
mm.
Or let's put it this way, I've heard it fail forward. It's really not failure, it's a movement. It's just
Yeah,
you make a decision, right? It's not a, it's like, I'm going to do this. If it's not for me, it's not for me, but I'm taking what I learned from here to the next thing, and a lot
right.
of times that's what happens.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is by just moving, at least trying to figure out which way to go or what might be open, then that's information, right? Clarity comes with
That's
action, I
right.
like to say. So now there's more experience, now there's more insight, there's more something there, and you may decide it's not the right thing for you, or you need to move in this other direction. But I
That's
love
right.
what you're sharing about just do, just go, just try, just let's see what opens up as you keep going. I think that's so great.
Yeah.
I think what's really, really hard, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit about this because especially in Silicon Valley, and right now the way things are, it's so competitive.
Hmm.
What we hear a lot is, I need to get it right, or I need to be the best
Right.
at, or I need to really,
That's right.
and it's all, everything you're sharing is almost the opposite. So, and I can also see the value in that, right?
Yeah.
Just, iterate, be adaptable, try new things, talk about that experience. How can you help the people that are listening to this do that? Where do you
Hmm.
begin?
Yes, that's a very good point. Um, so where I begin is with people. I mean, I think
Mm,
that's been the common thread across my whole career. Even to this day, I have my mentors, and that I consider my mentors, um, and people have been the key because how the truth is, a skill is never enough.
mm,
It's never going to be. You're never going to be enough on the skill level. But first of all, I say never enough because even if you got enough for one company, that might not be enough for another company. So it's until you talk to people that you could understand what really is good enough, and you'll start hearing these patterns. So maybe this kind of comes from my, other sort of background of like kind of the way my brain is wired is I'm looking for patterns. So people is the key thing, and I find that in this generation, you know, this generation has a lot of strengths. Again, like there's a lot of things that are better than our generation and Gen X. But one of the things that I find is that in the digital age, people are afraid to talk to people. Everyone's on their phone and they're afraid to actually interact with people. And that's been to this day my saving grace has been people. Look at us. Like, right, we're talking because someone introduced us, and it's just that's how it is.
mhm.
So when I got my first shot, it was I connected with someone, then I connected with people as mentors. What tended after what happened is I was taught. I actually, so this is an important pivot. I wanted to go to school because how am I going to tell my kids to go to school when I didn't go to school, right? So I was like, I have to go to school. So I started going to school, and I started taking my computer science, degree. I was talking to my boss, and my boss said, "What are you studying?" Because he was excited that I was starting school, and I was like, "I'm going to do computer science." And he just laughed. He was like, "What? Like, you have a career in like, do you realize you could?" They're not going to show you something that you don't know right now, because I was in cybersecurity. Like, I was surrounded by the top engineers at this point, right? So I was like literally in a university of talent. So he said, what did you always want to do in your life? And I said, art. He goes, just do that. Like, why are you going to go from a computer to a computer? I was like, all right. So that's when I took art school. And that's where the two worlds collided for me. And the rise of UX started coming out. It wasn't even called UX, it was
Wow.
graphic designers. But my trajectory, that I was doing art and I was an engineer, and the logic and the creative collided into this aesthetic functional world called UX. And when I started following that, then again, it's like now I start all over again, right? And that sort of story has been something that I've embraced. Is like, okay, now is a new challenge. How do I cross over? Because in that period of time, an engineer was very different than a designer. They didn't like, how do I go into this, compete against designers that are coming from graphic design school? So again, the reverse engineering part starts with talking to people. And at that time, I started talking to designers. I started talking to people and seeing what was good enough at the time for me to transition over.
Wow, I love that. You're right. We need each other no matter what we do, or, the level of innovation is so important.
Yeah.
I That is so interesting because you talk a lot about the art side of things, and then, what is now UX, what we know as UX,
Mm-hmm.
all the engineering, the curiosity that you took that. What advice do you have for someone that has all these different interests and feels a little lost about what direction do I go? How do I know? How do I bring things together?
Yeah. There's this theme that there's always a connection. There's this
Mm,
connective tissue in your
mm,
life that always exists if you look at it. If you kind of peer at what you're doing and you can kind of combine it. So my transition, for example, from engineering to design, went that we were developing a BlackBerry, phone, and it was the rise of mobile.
mm,
Every new major shift of technology is an opportunity to make that change. It's a very, very important thing for people to understand, because the .com allowed me to transition. Mobile allowed me to transition. Cloud and data allowed me to transition. AI is now allowing me transition. I'm in a transition now, right? So if you think about it, what is the connective tissue? So in that moment, I told my boss, can I design the mobile phone and develop it? So he allowed me to do that, and I did a BlackBerry. It wasn't the greatest design, it's BlackBerry, right? It's limited. But I also was able to embrace that and say, I designed a BlackBerry application, a security email application for BlackBerry, and I know how to design around constraints because I'm an engineer.
mm,
So that lights people up, because this guy's not going to be designing things that can't be developed. So that moved me into Verizon. And I
mm.
went in not as a designer, as an information architect, because I was already thinking about information as a developer. So if you look at what I'm calling this connective tissue, you'll see that if you're doing something, it doesn't matter if you're selling coffee, if you're a barista and you want to get into finance, well, guess what? Finance and coffee have a lot to do with each other. There's a business called, coffee shops. So you could probably move into, if you connect those two things together, there's always a connective point. And this allows, then you're just, after that, you're just kind of, in fact, it makes it easier for you, because what it does is it allows you to have a sniper approach, like being very focused on what you can do, and then you kind of nail that, right? So that transition, mobile, getting in early for mobile was really big for me. It was the rise of mobile, transition to design. And then after a while, the fact that I was able to do both the design and the functional allowed me to do complex applications and lead designers, towards this more functional approach. And so then, I started leading designers and leading design teams. And then the rise of cloud came in, which is a very complex environment. And the moment I saw cloud happening, I said, okay, data is the new oil. Like, there's no way that, like, if we're moving to cloud, this is going to be crazy. So that's what got me into Sumo Logic, and then did another transition, right? So these are moments where you're observing the world, you're observing the things that are happening, the shifts. Things are obvious, quite frankly. So you either get scared and you get paralyzed, or you just do something. And so that's a long answer to say, look for the connective tissue, look for the shifts in environment, and then just kind of try to figure out a way to put it together.
Daniel, I'm glad you mentioned that. It really resonates, the connective tissue, right? It's really an extension of what your interests are,
Yeah,
right? And then it's like the macro environment will also have this invisible force in what you do, right?
that's right.
So I think there's a lot of pressure in the early career to really control and dictate your next 20 years.
That's
But
right.
you would have not been able to predict UX as a pathway when you started.
Yeah,
It's interesting. It's like an invitation to take that pressure off of, like, do what you're interested in. Do the 1, 2, or 3 things that you're interested in. It doesn't have to be one. If it's 2, don't worry that it doesn't exist perfectly right now. Allow for some of that magic.
that's right.
Allow for some of those interests. And what other time would your connective tissues have mapped perfectly with the macro environment
Yeah,
trend, right? And technological innovation. And it's like, if we don't allow for those experiences, then we limit ourselves, right? So there has to be a
yeah,
little bit of unknown. It's like 40% of your career you could control, 60% is there's just some unknowns that are going to unfold regardless of what you do.
yeah,
Thank
exactly.
you.
And the funny thing about that is that the unknown is unknown for everybody. So it's like it levels the playing field. And I think that's also one thing subconsciously I was doing. No one really knew about mobile. So the moment I knew about mobile, a designer that had 5 years or 10 years experience didn't know about mobile. I did. So it levels the playing field, right? So if you look at it in AI, so many people do not know about AI. They know ChatGPT, but they don't really know about AI. If someone learns it, guess what? You just elevated yourself. And now the macroeconomic pieces, I would say to the unknown, it is important to align to the economic environment. That way it's not just, oh, I'm just doing what I love. No, yeah, follow the passion, but follow it, be smart about it. Like follow it where the world is going. Don't just try to shift in a direction where, you know, it's the opposite direction. So I would just caution that in the sense that because I wasn't raised in an educational academic environment, both the, you know, that's the bad, right? The weakness. But also the good is that I didn't have those constraints. And when you know, people that are very academic, they tend to think the world is going to be like a course and that it's going to go from one semester to another, and the world is chaotic.
I love that, because what's coming up from a kind of a general theme of what you're sharing here is, if we give ourselves a chance to remove labels, or this idea that I want to be X, or I want to have the, you know, do this job, this thing, and really focus on kind of the parts of it that are interesting, or the part, and it could be multiple jobs, you know, labels, but taking the
Right.
best of what are your favorite things and just immerse yourself and try, explore, talk to people. Somehow,
That's right.
magically, the job, whatever it's called, will appear, or you're in the right spaces talking to the right people. And I love how you use
Yeah.
your curiosity and those experiences to kind of shape your way through that and land wherever you landed, whatever it was called. But that's how I see where that kind of the cutting edge part of your experience really came in. I love that. That is very
Yeah.
cool.
The people are key. The people
Yeah.
are key. I can't stress that enough, because you're
Mhm.
running blind. People
Mhm.
will help you. You know, people
Yes.
will help you, and you got to be creative on that front as well. One thing that I think you know, I mentioned to my mentees that I've done a lot of is just cold calling mentors. They become my mentors. You know, they're not mentors, obviously. But what I do is, so for example, the UX. Okay, so Jesse James Garrett, famous guy who wrote, who came up with Ajax and the technology, and wrote the Elements of UX, which is a fantastic book, which everyone, even who's not in UX, should get it. He wrote the book when it first came out. I emailed him because he put his email on the book. And I asked him a question, and he readjusted my way of thinking because I was still thinking like an engineer. And that little reply, even though it was just short, it really, you know, helped. Sometimes I'll listen to a podcast and I'll reach out. Hey, I loved your podcast. I have, you know, 1 or 2 questions. If you can borrow like 20 minutes, you know, and you'd be surprised how many people will say yes. They'll just like, yeah, sure. And, you know, and I've gotten mentors like that, where like, you're like, yeah, anytime, you know, if you need more, you know, and okay, well, you need more here. I need more. So, you know, I'll ask them. And of course you don't want to abuse it, but those key touch points, these are people that are super smart. They're experts in their field, and you can reach out to them and you can ask them a question, and before you know it, you build a relationship, and then, you know, and then you have them as mentors and coaches, and you can even ask them for advice. So I do a lot of that because I know that I don't know and that they do. And, you know, just have your list of questions ready and they'll guide you. They'll be like, you know, what I found is that what you think is difficult is easy, or what you think is important is not as important. What you don't think is that important is very important. And that alignment is everything. You're like, oh, don't worry about that. You know, I know you're very worried about that. Don't worry about that. But this is super important. Ah, okay, now I can, you know, those are the types of things you got to listen for. And I would suggest that anyone who's trying to get into a field, really the mentor, the coach, the guidance at the human level is everything.
I love the juxtaposition of you know, what you think isn't, right? Challenge yourself to think about it differently. And when it comes to reaching out to people, like cold outreach, what comes to mind is I often hear, oh, they're too busy, or they're too, you know, they're too high up to get back to me. What, you know, who am I? And so it's lonely at the top too, right? So I'm constantly
Yeah,
reminding people, like, reach out anyway. You never know, and who knows where it will
that's right.
go. Be curious. I love that advice. That's so great. I would love to open this up to any questions from anyone who's in the audience here. Any questions? What are you wondering about?
Yeah, I have a question. So, Daniel, you talk about like how you lived in very different places. My question to you is like, how important has location been for your career? And like, what did each location teach you personally and professionally?
Oh, that's such a great question. It's been very important for me, I would say. You live in a bubble most of the times, whatever that bubble is, and getting outside of that bubble is super important to see another perspective. It also immerses you in a culture that also rejiggles your brain a little bit. Like, you know, I worked in Silicon Valley for a long time, and that's a bubble. All businesses don't run like startups. You go outside of that bubble, you realize, oh wait, I'm designing applications, for example, in my case, and I'm biased. You become very biased, right? Now I'm in Guadalajara, right, in Mexico, and I'm looking at how Latin America rolls. Like the business world in Latin America is a completely different thing than in the US. They're adapting, you know, Silicon Valley mindset and, you know, a lot of that, but it's a completely different culture. And it's teaching me a lot. So right now I'm immersed in that, and I'm adapting as well, learning what's important, what's not important. So I would say location does matter. What doesn't matter is what location. Does it matter that I go from one location to another? Probably not. You know, if you like it, you learn. If you don't like it, you still learned, and now you go somewhere else and you learn something. But the doing is the key thing.
Great question, Adrian. Anyone else?
I have one. It's close to Adrian's question, but a little bit more focused on my current situation. So I've had a company of my own, an agency. I've made great connections. I've worked with amazing people. Now I'm moving to LA, and for the first time in a lot of time, I'm open to look into opportunities in corporate world, specifically in like specific companies and stuff. So I've already started like moving a little bit of the pieces, reaching out to people like you mentioned. I even went to LA and had lunch in front of Blizzard Entertainment because that's like my top priority, and just to hang out and see, okay, who shows up. But would you have any specific advice, like, okay, let's try this, to try and reach out to people and maximize my opportunities? Because I know if I'm seated in front of somebody, good things happen. But going beyond that application wall, like I've applied to a couple jobs and never heard of it again. I know if I can sit down in front of somebody, maybe I
Yeah.
can move them. It's like a dating app. I have a lot of confidence
Yeah.
once I'm sitting in front, but before, just the swiping is so hard. Do you have any specific tips for me in this stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I go back to sort of the strengths and looking at your strengths and matching them with whatever pain or something that is an opportunity, right? So the ability to look at that opportunity and observe. So a lot of in the beginning, what you should spend a lot of time is observing and seeing where there's opportunity that your point of view is different. And that's the whole point. You're going to bring your different point of view and match it to an opportunity that needs your point of view. Now, what that is, only you will know, because they don't even know it, right? So I'll give you an example. Like, if I was to say I'm here in Latin America, what can I do? If I say I'm from Silicon Valley, in Silicon Valley, that's not a strength, because it's just what everybody's there. But if I come here and I try to say, okay, well, how can I use this? Well, not every company wants to become Silicon Valley. So obviously it's not a match for everyone. But I bet you there's a lot of companies that want to move towards this iterative, agile, fast moving. Okay, well, I'm a match, right? So look at it from that perspective, from the perspective of what is it that you're bringing, and where's the observability. And sometimes it's just talking, like understanding, like, oh yeah, this is why they don't even see it, but I see it, and like kind of see that, that match. I think there's so much opportunity in that, and you really shine in those opportunities, because when they see it, and the more you can, that's probably the hardest part, is communicating that. Some things are a little easier than others, but I would say, like, you're doing the right thing. Just absorb the environment and become a sponge, but always be observant in terms of like what they're saying. And of course, I'm biased because my whole company is based on this, is identifying your target market and trying to see where the challenges are, right? So being able to do that, you're the product. And so if you look at it from that perspective, if you're selling a product, you're going to see who needs what I can give, and the hardest part is the match, right? It's like, okay, matching with them.
Thank you
Awesome.
for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions here?
I have another question. So, you kind of mentioned like to look at the market and how it shifts. And so, like, for example, like if a new market, like for example, like AI is emerging, and your company or you yourself doesn't have any direct involvement into it in AI, how do you start learning about it, and how do you immerse yourself in it? Like, what steps do you take?
When you say it doesn't, in what way doesn't it have involvement in it?
Like, for example, if like you work at maybe a consulting company that hasn't yet
Okay.
isn't using AI yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So it doesn't for them, but it can for you. That's the key. You have wherever you're at, the context and the data that is there is gold. And you got to understand that you're sitting on gold. So the fact that you're immersed in this space, you can go and create a prototype. It's you observe, you're like, oh, there's a pain point. You know what? They're spending 3 days to do this process. Multiply that. In fact, we did this. One of the best ways for us in design to sell a solution one time was we got the executives, we put a chart, and we said, right now, these are all the steps, and it takes this long. And if you multiply that by the man hours and the salary, it's going to cost you approximately this much. This new process, we want to shorten it to this, and we're going to save you this much time and this much money. Guess what? We said, in our ask, we're looking for a sponsor. CTO immediately said, I'll sponsor, right? Like, it's just like, it's an easy sell. So in your case, you have that. You're observing, you're seeing things that are happening. It doesn't matter how big or small. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're training your brain to go, I'm going to solve that on my own. You go YouTube, and you just go, and literally, like, you could, I'm not exaggerating when I could say that you can create a prototype, even if you're not a developer. So the way I got into the company that I'm building now, and when I saw AI, I hadn't coded for 12 years, much less Python. I don't know Python, right? So I saw a YouTube video that said you could build a prototype in, these YouTube videos, right? In like 30 minutes. I thought, I wonder if I could still code. So I opened up GPT, opened up the laptop, opened up YouTube, and I just went at it. And before you know it, by the end of the weekend, I had a prototype. I was like, whoa, what just happened? This is crazy. So just do it. Like, connect, you become the connection, and put that on your portfolio. Don't cheat yourself. Once you do it, put it on your portfolio, and maybe, you know, pitch it to them, and maybe you're the entry for them to start doing, even if it's a little thing.
Thank you for that. Daniel, before we move into rapid fire, what are your 3 favorite tips that you like to share with your mentees or someone who's in the early career? What are the takeaways?
Yes, that's good. I would say the first one is the people side of things, right? Connections are very, very important. Don't underestimate them. Be active looking for them. Like, actively look for these connections. It takes work, I get it. But, you know, as you're doing it, it yields pretty big results. The second thing is, I always tell them, you know, you really do have to be hungry to learn, and curiosity. So find the thing that motivates you, the thing that you don't need someone, it drives you in itself, right? That's been a big, big piece of my trajectory, is that if, and it's also a downfall, because if I go into something, man, I'm going hard. So, you know, but no one needs to wake me up and tell me to do it. It's like, I'm just doing it. So find the thing that drives your hunger. Like, stay hungry is an important piece of that. And then the third one is, you know, it's really about question, like, observe and question. I think that's kind of a big piece, where I think sometimes we kind of go in too much. Even this happens to me, where when, like, things are too defined and too, like, those are the limits. If you step back a little bit and you kind of observe and just kind of question, let the questions kind of pop up, that I think is a very important skill. Those are probably the 3 things that stand out for me.
I love that. The last one reminds me of staying open, right? Staying open.
Yeah.
Jen, is there something you wanted to share? Great. All right. Any final questions? We're going to move into a few rapid fire questions for fun and get to know Daniel a bit more personally. Any final questions here?
I do have one question. My question is there a specific moment you had in that journey of transitioning from, you know, like you're saying, selling wine and beer, being in Puerto Rico, that you felt like you could give up at that moment, and what kind of excelled you past that?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Yes, for sure. I mean, I think, and then to some degree, you kind of need those lows to balance everything out, right? And why you're doing it is usually the answer, in terms of, like, and honestly, sometimes the answer is, I don't want to keep going. Like, I've been in that situation too. I've been in a situation where I remember having, you know, wanting build this startup at that time, and then, you know, I'm tired, exhausted, and I realized, wait a minute, do I really need to do this? Probably right now it's not a good time. You ditch it, right? So being able to, so I would say, what motivates you, what, you know, why you're doing it, and then, you know, and then you decide at that point if you want to wake up the next day and feel a little different. And I also find that, for me personally, patterns matter. Like, sometimes I'm burning myself out, and that's causing this situation. I just, like, oh, it's not really about that. It's about something else that's happening in my life that I need to kind of resolve.
Great question. Okay, a couple final things for you, Daniel. You can have
Okay.
lunch with anyone in the world. Who would it be and why?
Man, there's so many people. Oh man, can I have a round table, like Frida Kahlo,
Yes.
Leonardo da Vinci? Yeah, I would say, like, Leonardo da Vinci, just because the guy was all over the place. So I just, but Frida Kahlo, obviously, Frida Kahlo, and, you know, the art side of things. And I would say, modern times, Rick Rubin, because Rick Rubin is a producer that just knows how to bring out the magic out of people. Like, how he does it, it's amazing. But he just brings out people that are artists that are just like stuck, and then all of a sudden they just blow up. You would never imagine, everything from country to rock, rap, and everything. The guy just has a gift for that.
That is really cool. Okay, and travel destination. What's your favorite travel destination?
Portugal, Lisbon. I love Lisbon. I fell in love with Lisbon.
Wow, love it. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, valuable insights, your journey, being really vulnerable and honest with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone here, we have Daniel's LinkedIn link. You are welcome to reach out anytime.
Absolutely.
Daniel is so passionate about just connecting with others. So thank you for your time,
Yep.
Daniel. Thank you to everyone that joined and all of your questions. We'll be recording this, so if you want to catch up on this or share this with anyone, you will find us on our YouTube channel and on our website. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.